Welcome back, everyone. Today we're tackling one of history's most enduring mysteries, Atlantis.
Ah, yes, the Lost Island Kingdom. It really has captured imaginations for, what, over 2,000 years now?
Exactly. Ever since Plato mentioned it in his dialogues, Timaeus and Critias,
Mhm.
this idea of a super advanced civilization just vanishing beneath the waves,
It's a powerful image.
it really is. So for this deep dive, we want to go back to Plato's original story. What did he actually say?
Good place to start, because a lot gets layered on top over the centuries.
For sure. And then we'll pit that against some of the big scientific theories trying to locate it, or at least explain the legend.
We'll be looking mainly at the Santorini idea and the Richat Structure theory.
That's the plan, to try and get a sense of where the scholarly thinking is right now.
And wrestling with that core question, really, was it real history, a philosophical lesson from Plato?
Or, maybe a bit of both tangled together. Let's jump into Plato's account first. Where did he say this place was?
Okay, location. Plato describes it as a massive island. He says it was larger than Libya and Asia Minor combined.
Wow, that's not small, that's huge.
Absolutely enormous. And critically, he places it in front of the mouth, which you Greeks call the Pillars of Heracles.
Which most people take to mean the Strait of Gibraltar, right?
Yeah,
Entrance to the Atlantic.
that's the common interpretation, yes. And Plato himself distinguishes the Mediterranean, calls it a sort of narrow entrance from the real ocean beyond the Atlantic.
So definitely an Atlantic location in his telling.
It seems pretty clear from his description. He even mentions Atlantis being a stepping stone to other islands, and beyond them, a huge opposite continent.
Which sounds a lot like the Americas looking back, though. Obviously, he wouldn't have known that.
Precisely. But this location description has fueled endless debate. Was it mid-Atlantic? Or maybe the pillars meant something else back then, somewhere within the Mediterranean.
Interesting point. But the scale he describes, it dominates.
It really does paint a picture of a major power outside the familiar Greek West.
Okay, what about when this supposedly happened? The timeline is always a tricky part.
Ah, yes. This is where it gets, well, really mind-boggling. Plato dates Atlantis to 9,000 years before his own time.
9,000 years. So do the math. That puts it around 9,400 BCE.
Roughly, yeah. Mid-9th millennium BCE.
But wait, that's the Neolithic period, like late Stone Age stuff, right? Before cities as we know them, before complex metallurgy.
Exactly. It's way before the Bronze Age civilizations we usually think of as advanced. So having this incredibly sophisticated empire that Plato describes existing then, it clashes hard with archaeology.
That's a massive discrepancy. Did he mean it literally?
That's the million-dollar question. To make it even weirder, Plato also dates the founding of his own city, Athens, to that same impossible era, which we know from archaeology is incorrect.
Okay, so that throws doubt on the number itself. Maybe it was a mistake. Copied wrong.
That's one theory, errors in transmission over centuries. Or maybe Plato misunderstood a source, perhaps from Solon's alleged trip to Egypt where he supposedly heard the story.
Or maybe the number wasn't meant literally at all. Perhaps it just signified a very, very long time ago.
That's another strong possibility among scholars. But taking it at face value, that 9400 BCE date is a major stumbling block for finding a direct historical parallel.
It really challenges how we think about ancient timelines. Let's dig into the society itself. What was Atlantis like, according to Plato?
He describes it as an incredibly powerful naval empire, technologically advanced with amazing architecture.
Like what? What kind of details did he give?
He talks about these incredible complex systems of canals, immense wealth, gold, silver, and this mysterious metal called orichalcum.
Orichalcum, I've heard of that. What even is it supposed to be?
Nobody knows for sure. Speculation ranges from a type of brass or bronze, some kind of copper alloy, to something purely legendary. But Plato presents it as incredibly valuable, second only to gold.
Okay, so rich, advanced. Who ruled this place?
It was a confederation led by 10 kings, all supposedly descendants of the sea god Poseidon and a mortal woman, Cleito.
Ah, the divine connection. Classic Greek mythology touch.
Absolutely. And initially, Plato says these Atlanteans were virtuous, noble, almost godlike. They lived in harmony.
But there's always a but in these stories, isn't there?
There is. Over time, their divine nature weakened. They became filled with greed, ambition, a desire to conquer everything.
Classic hubris narrative.
Exactly. They launched this massive invasion against Athens and other lands around the Mediterranean.
So Plato sets them up as this amazing ideal, but then also as a cautionary tale.
Precisely. It's both a picture of a lost utopia and a moral lesson about what happens when power corrupts and societies lose their way. a theme that still feels relevant.
No kidding. So how did it all end for them, the big cataclysm?
Well, after Athens supposedly defeated their invasion, a point Plato emphasizes, the gods decided to intervene. Zeus, seeing their arrogance, wasn't pleased.
You don't want to make Zeus angry.
Definitely not. He unleashed violent earthquakes and floods. And then the final blow, in a single day and night of misfortune, the entire island of Atlantis sank beneath the sea.
Just gone in 24 hours.
Gone, swallowed by the waves. Plato even adds that the area became an impassable shoal of mud, preventing navigation.
Wow. Again, very dramatic. The divine punishment for their arrogance.
Textbook Greek morality play, in a sense. But it's interesting that the mechanisms of destruction, earthquakes, floods, subsidence, are real geological phenomena.
Right. Which leads us naturally to the scientific theories. Could this story, even if embellished, have been inspired by a real event? Let's talk Santorini.
Okay, the Santorini hypothesis. This is probably the most popular contender, linking Atlantis to the Minoan civilization.
The Minoans, Bronze Age, Aegean Sea, right? Centered on Crete, but also on the island of Thera, which is modern Santorini.
Exactly. Flourishing around, say, 2500 down to about 1600 BCE. And around 1600 BCE, the dates vary slightly, maybe 1606 to 1589 BCE. Based on recent dating, something massive happened on Thera.
The volcanic eruption.
A truly colossal eruption. We're talking one of the biggest in recorded human history. On par with Krakatoa, maybe even bigger. It completely reshaped the island, creating the giant caldera we see today.
And the fallout must have been immense.
Devastating. Huge tsunamis would have radiated out across the Aegean, slamming into Crete and other islands. Massive ashfall burying landscapes, likely causing climate shifts. It certainly destroyed the Minoan centers on Thera itself.
So a major advanced island civilization dealt a catastrophic blow by a natural disaster. The parallel seems obvious.
It does. It feels like the kind of event that could easily become legendary, distorted over time perhaps, but originating from a real catastrophe.
And we have physical proof at Akrotiri, right? The city buried by the eruption.
Yes, Akrotiri is incredible. It's a Minoan city on Santorini, perfectly preserved under layers of volcanic ash, like a Bronze Age Pompeii.
What do they find there? Does it match Plato at all?
Well, it shows a highly sophisticated society, advanced urban planning, multi-story buildings, amazing frescoes showing maritime scenes, complex plumbing.
Definitely an advanced culture for its time.
Absolutely. Not maybe the hyper-advanced tech Plato applies for Atlantis, but certainly a high point of Bronze Age civilization. Interestingly, they found very few human remains.
Meaning they might have evacuated. Got some warning.
That's the suggestion. Perhaps earthquake swarms beforehand gave them time to flee, but the city itself was entombed, suddenly.
So you have the island setting, the advanced culture, the catastrophic natural destruction. It lines up in several ways.
It does. The parallels are quite compelling. An island civilization effectively wiped out by a natural cataclysm involving the sea and earth shaking.
But then we hit that timeline wall again. 1600 BCE versus Plato's 9400 BCE. That's almost 8,000 years difference.
It's the biggest hurdle for the Santorini theory, no doubt. How do you bridge that gap?
What are the proposed explanations?
Several ideas float around. One is simple error. Plato got the number wrong, or it got corrupted over time. Maybe it was originally 900 years, not 9,000, before Solon's time, which would put it much closer.
A misplaced zero, basically.
Or a misinterpretation. Solon supposedly heard the story from Egyptian priests. There's a theory that maybe Egyptian chronology or symbols for numbers were misunderstood, leading to a tenfold inflation of the date.
Okay, that's plausible, I suppose. What about the geography? Santorini isn't that big, and it's in the Med, not the Atlantic.
True. But before the eruption, Thera was a larger, single island, likely more circular in shape. Some argue that for ancient Greeks, anything beyond their immediate sphere might have felt like the outer ocean.
Stretching the definition a bit, maybe.
Perhaps. But the Minoans were definitely a major maritime power with advanced culture, fitting that part of Plato's description. So you weigh the compelling parallels against the significant date and location discrepancies.
It's not a perfect fit,
Yeah.
but you can see why it's persisted as a theory.
Absolutely. It provides a real documented catastrophe involving an advanced island culture.
Okay, let's pivot to the other main contender,
Yeah.
the Richat Structure. This one takes us somewhere completely different.
Completely different. We're heading to Mauritania, West Africa, the Sahara Desert.
The Eye of the Sahara, I've seen pictures. It's incredible looking, these perfect concentric rings.
That's the core of the hypothesis. Proponents look at those rings and see Plato's description of the capital city of Atlantis, alternating rings of land and water connected by canals.
Visual resemblance is striking, you have to admit.
It is. And the structure's huge, which proponents argue fits Plato's description of Atlantis's overall size, or at least its central city's influence.
Is there any other evidence connecting it?
Some try to draw etymological links, suggesting connections between local names or features and the name Atlantic. The argument is primarily visual and geographical interpretation, though.
But interpreting those rings as man-made canals seems like a stretch, doesn't it?
That's a major point of contention. Geologists have a very clear explanation for the Richat structure.
Before we get to that, is there any archaeological evidence nearby? Like Akrotiri for Santorini?
Well, proponents claim there's evidence of ancient settlements or activity in the broader region that could point to a lost civilization.
But is that widely accepted?
Not really. There's certainly evidence of prehistoric human presence in the Sahara, but nothing on the scale or sophistication of Plato's Atlantis, specifically linked to the Richat structure during a relevant time frame, has been widely accepted by mainstream archaeology. It lacks the kind of concrete site like Akrotiri.
Okay, so what are the big challenges for the Richat theory? You mentioned geology.
Right. The biggest challenge is that the Richat structure is definitively a natural geological formation. It's known as a domed anticline, layers of rock pushed up and then eroded over vast periods.
How old is it? Does it fit Plato's timeline?
Not even close. It's vastly older. The rocks themselves date back hundreds of millions of years, and the uplift and erosion process creating the visible structure happened over millions of years too, long before Plato's 9400 BCE, let alone any human civilization capable of building it.
Millions of years, okay. That's
A huge problem. And then there's a location. Plato is very specific, an island in the Atlantic Ocean that sank.
And the Richat structure is deep in the Sahara Desert, hundreds of kilometers inland.
Exactly. It's about as far from island in the Atlantic as you can get. While sea levels have changed, there's no geological evidence suggesting that area was a large island in the Atlantic around 9400 BCE that subsequently sank.
So the scientific consensus is firmly against it being Atlantis.
Overwhelmingly so. Geologists see a natural feature. Archaeologists don't see evidence of the required civilization. The location and timeline are completely off from Plato's account. The visual resemblance of the circles is really the only significant point of connection.
Okay, let's try to sum this up. Comparing Plato directly with these two theories.
Right. Plato. Mid-Atlantic. Huge island, 9400 BCE, hyper-advanced, sank. Santorini. Aegean Sea, smaller island, 1600 BCE, advanced Bronze Age, destroyed by volcanic tsunami, Richat. Sahara Desert, natural geology, millions of years old, visually resembles city layout.
The overlaps are pretty limited when you lay it out like that. Santorini shares the island destroyed by cataclysm theme.
And has real archaeological backing for an advanced contemporary culture, Akrotiri. But the date and location are wrong, according to Plato's text.
Richat has the visual echo of the city description.
But literally everything else, location, date, origin, evidence of civilization, contradicts Plato and known science.
So, scientifically speaking, Santorini seems more plausible as a potential, heavily distorted inspiration.
I think that's fair to say. It involves a known, massive geological event impacting a known, advanced civilization in a way that has some resonance with the type of destruction Plato describes, even if the specifics differ wildly. The timeline issue is the major sticking point you have to explain away.
Whereas Richat requires ignoring geology, archaeology, and Plato's explicit location details.
Pretty much. Plus, our modern understanding of plate tectonics just doesn't support a large continent-sized island existing in the mid-Atlantic and sinking geologically recently. There's no mechanism for that.
Are these the only two theories out there?
Oh, not at all. There have been dozens, probably hundreds, of proposed locations over the years. Ireland, Spain, the Azores, the Black Sea connected to flood myths, Antarctica, you name it, someone's probably suggested it was Atlantis.
But none have gained the kind of traction that Santorini has, even with its flaws.
Generally not within serious academic circles. Which brings us to perhaps the most important perspective here.
Which is?
The strong consensus among classicists, philosophers, and many archaeologists that Atlantis wasn't a real place at all.
That Plato just made it up.
Essentially, yes. That it was a philosophical construct, an allegory, a vehicle for him to explore ideas about ideal states, political philosophy, the dangers of imperialism, and societal decay.
So Athens represented the virtuous, ideal state in his story, and Atlantis, the powerful but ultimately corrupt empire, doomed by its own hubris.
Exactly. He uses Atlantis as a narrative device to illustrate these philosophical points, contrasting it with an idealized ancient Athens. The specific details, the location, the date, the orichalcum might just be literary invention to make the story compelling.
So the search for a physical Atlantis might be missing the point of Plato's story entirely.
That's the argument. That he wasn't writing history or geography, he was writing philosophy using a fictional narrative framework, perhaps inspired by vague legends or real events like Thera, but ultimately a creation of his own.
Right, so wrapping this up, Santorini offers some tempting echoes of a real Bronze Age catastrophe. But that timeline issue is huge.
A major hurdle, yes. While the Richat Structure theory, despite the visual intrigue, faces insurmountable scientific obstacles regarding geology, archaeology, location, and dating.
And the dominant scholarly view remains that Atlantis is likely Plato's invention, a philosophical myth.
That's where most serious scholarship lands, yes. A brilliant story, perhaps drawing on half-remembered tales or real disasters, but ultimately created to serve Plato's philosophical aims.
Yet the legend just refuses to die, doesn't it? Whether it was real or allegory or something in between, we're still fascinated by this idea of a lost golden civilization.
Absolutely. It taps into something deep in the human psyche, the idea of lost Edens, catastrophic ends, forgotten knowledge. It's a story that continues to resonate.
Which does make you wonder, thinking about how persistent myths are and our love for these kinds of stories. What other ancient legends or enduring myths might hold similar faint, distorted echoes of real events or places, transformed almost beyond recognition by time and retelling?
That's a fascinating question to ponder, isn't it? How much forgotten history might be buried deep within our oldest stories?